I've seen the references for Chan and Dudley, and as I said, I borrowed that from my colleagues in the School of English. I haven't got that full reference to hand. I could find it for you, Deb, but I haven't got it here.
There's also a second question in the chat B from Jane of, did you get the sense of students' concerns, what they felt they needed tallied up with what their professors were asking for?
I think, yes. So on the Padlet, and some of the things, it was around sort of one of the things that somebody said on the Padlet is, what if I say something stupid in a seminar and look like an absolute idiot? So I think that kind of reflected the professor's sort of fear of, not concern around people not talking. I do think that there is work to be done around. I don't think that history should necessarily change its pedagogy. And I think while it's in the sort of lovely position of still having small group sizes, they can have, I suppose, kind of more traditional Oxford seminar type conversations. But I think they're successful historians who enjoy that debate and that discussion. And I think they don't necessarily have that awareness of how intimidating it can be. So I think there's work to be done with the tutors around the intimidation that creates. And I mean, I think it's in, because I felt that when I was studying history myself. I remember sitting in the undergraduate seminars, and it was small group, and I'd done the work, but I remember sort of staring at the floor, kind of desperately hoping that nobody was going to ask me a question, because I didn't have the confidence to speak at that time. And I think that they also forget that confidence for the students that have done an undergraduate program with them, and that's what it tends to be. If they're UK students, they're doing a master's in the same university in Leeds anyway. They've developed that confidence, and they've also got that relationship with the tutors because they know them already. So I think it's sort of it's for the tutors to work on rather than the students to some extent. I think a lot of the international students, even in history, are coming from different disciplines, and I think the historians weren't necessarily aware of that. And I mean, history talks a lot about decolonizing the curriculum, and it does, and it has worked to decolonize, but it hasn't decolonized the way that it communicates, and it hasn't understood necessarily that communication around history in other countries might not be the same as it is in the UK. So I think that there's a lot of, that's why I thought it was really important to work with the lecturers as well as the students to kind of get that. Ideally, I'd like them all in the same room together and to do something, but that's unlikely to happen. Okay. What was the English? Okay, the English proficiency level of non-native, it's a standard IELTS 6.5. That's what it is for all PGT students in Leeds. There is a couple of exceptions, but that's what it is. Yeah. And I think, again, the amount of reading is in history, you have to enjoy reading. And I think that's, I'm pretty sure that the international students, the L2 speakers, do enjoy reading, but they've probably never read the amount in English that they are expected to read in history. So that, I think, and that was something that we didn't talk about at all. We didn't even get into the reading part of things, particularly because I just didn't have time. Okay, XJTLU overhauling, optional non-credit bearing, ESAP support embedded with school. Okay. I mean, I've talked to colleagues in other universities about what we did in Leeds, and their concern always was around ethics of not providing the same support to all students. So we went on a school by school basis when schools approached us, rather than kind of getting a university agreement to say this is going to be provided everywhere. So there are some students who still don't have access to language centre staff on in Sessional, even at taught postgraduate level, because those schools haven't engaged with us. So that's a thing for you to think about. Leeds is such a big university that we decided that the way we would work on it in terms of ethics was when we had conversations with schools, we would say, we would like this to be offered to all students in your school because that feels ethical to us. And then if they insisted, no, it was going to be in one program because that was where they had a large number of international students, or no, it was only going to be for international students, we would go with what they said because it was their school and their students, but keep pushing and working to kind of extend it beyond. So that's one thing to think about. I think the other thing is it takes time. It really does take time, and it's exhausting for the language centre colleague quite often, kind of emotionally and intellectually to some extent, to work with colleagues. You have to have a relationship with colleagues and understand what they do, and they want to work with you when they're panicking about a problem, and then they forget about you for months on end, and you kind of have to be really quite persistent and kind of go, and there's me, and can I come to your staff meetings, and can I do this, and you feel like you've got no friends and you're quite isolated and lonely. So I think it's really important to maintain a sense of community within your language centre and the connection where people can kind of talk to each other. Ideally, having two colleagues working in the same school, so at least you've got a friend, but that's the ideal. Yeah. And I because I led on that for quite a long time, I wasn't doing it, and I've now experienced that sort of sense of loneliness, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know, it was great that I had the sort of School of English colleagues to talk to, because they've had sort of similar, I suppose it's a similar approach to teaching in the schools, and because I'd worked with colleagues, and I knew what I was getting myself in for, because I'd sort of, I suppose, worked with colleagues who'd been through it for years on end already. L1 students, I think it's really, really important to have L1 students in there because it's a lot of the work and the sort of is about them communicating with each other and understanding each other, and kind of helping them realize how impressive it is that these students are studying in a language that is not their first language, that they don't necessarily feel comfortable with. It makes the teaching more difficult in some ways, because you kind of got to get the sort of balance between the sort of focus on linguistic-y stuff and the meta language that you might use, that international students are kind of used to working with because they've studied English as an academic subject, and then you kind of sometimes lose the UK students that don't think in terms of that, but I think they find it helpful in the end. Yeah, lectures definitely want a quick fix, Tim. They've said it's useful, but I did intend to follow the lecturers and kind of follow up with them, but I didn't. I might do later, and I'll have to revisit the ethical approval. But I kind of then got caught up in the other in-sessional teaching that I was doing, because I was also working with the School of Geography for the first time this year as well. So I kind of moved from history and sort of had already started geography and had to start talking to them. It just was too much. I've got some writing that I've got to do that I've been putting off for years as well. So I've lost the thread now because I've been scrolling backwards and forwards. And
the next one is kind of linked to the question that you've just answered, but what do you think went well?
I created a beautiful Padlet. And that yeah, the students appreciated the work that I'd done, I think, and they appreciated the time that they spent together. I think it created a nice sense of community for them right at the beginning, where they were still a bit lost and a bit of structure in that induction week. I think history induction week for taught postgraduate students, I mean, I don't know, so I need to be a bit hedge, but I don't think there was a lot of engagement with the school in induction week, and so I think they turned up expecting stuff, so they got the stuff from me. So I think it worked well as a kind of mini pre-sessional. I think in terms of in-sessional, I don't know how much they looked at and referred back to the Padlet afterwards or not, whether they found it useful or not. Again, I'd intended to revisit them, and I did sort of at kind of Christmas, I thought, oh, I need to contact those students who kind of gave me ethical approval, and then I didn't. So it's really difficult to say what went well, because basically I taught 4 classes, and it was, yeah. And I never feel like things go as well as they should anyway.
The next question is, did you give them any strategies for vocabulary building?
Not for vocabulary building as such. We talked about key concepts. And I asked them to sort of identify by looking at kind of their because it was right at the beginning, at their course catalogue information and what they thought, so kind of preparing them for the kinds of things that they would be discussing. So it wasn't really vocabulary building, but it was, because I didn't have that much time. It was about helping them understand that when they come across conceptual vocabulary, they don't need to understand it. So again, it was that work with sort of UK and international students together, that helping them understand that just because you feel really comfortable and fluent and proficient in a language, you're also not going to know the meaning of these words, because they're ones that you develop an understanding over time as you kind of continue to study. So words like historiography, we focused on a lot, and kind of I'd interviewed one tutor and had a video recording of her talking about the sort of things that students kind of struggled with, and how they taught those key concepts. But no, because I didn't have enough time. I didn't help them with assignments, because that was later on. I'd gone by then. I could see what the assignments had been for the previous year. They were essay assignments. So what I did do was give them an example, or look at bits of past student essays, and broke down elements of it to kind of help them sort of see why and how it was successful. I also showed them, we looked at the assessment criteria, which is standard across the whole school, and an example of the feedback that a student got. And I asked them, without having seen the essay, to look at the feedback and the assessment criteria and decide what grade they thought the student had got. And all of them downgraded the student based on the feedback, so then we had a conversation about how you deal with feedback, because what they saw was the negativity in the feedback, which wasn't actually that negative, but it was like, you've done this really well, but there was only a sentence about that, and then it was like, and this is what you need to do. So it was good feedback, because it was sort of feed forward into what you need to do next to get better. And so helping students understand that when you get that feedback, it's not saying that you're terrible, it's how you're going to get better. But I didn't help them towards the assignments that they were doing, because I was gone. Seminars, I think that's teacher identity. I think for the lecturers, what they notice is, I used to be able to sit in a seminar and all the students would interact and talk to me together, particularly at master's level, and they would feel confident and we would have great conversations, and I could then help them develop their understanding in that way so that they could do their assessments better, because that's kind of history pedagogy, to sort of develop that sort of discursive understanding that you then can build into that, in the sort of critical discussion. It's Socratic. So the teachers felt that they were not teaching well, because they were not getting that usual interaction from the students, and sort of students, so they couldn't tell whether students had engaged with the texts or not. So I think it's not part of their assessment, but it's part of the pedagogy. And that was why, that's what lecturers notice, because when you're sort of sitting and it feels like there's tumbleweed in your classroom, you kind of start to think, and they feel that it used to work, maybe it didn't, then they think it's a problem with the students. There were questions around what they might need to do. So they were interested in sort of thinking about how they could get better engagement. But I think we need to think more carefully about what we mean by engagement as well. So